Terry Talks with Terry Gillis.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another Terry Talk, continuing our conversation about the grand reopening. And this week, I want to focus our chat just a little bit more on culture. As many of you know at ARIA, we believe that the ultimate trifecta for organizational success centers around culture, engagement, and leadership. You have to have a great culture, have to have engaged employees and good leadership in order for you to have a successful organization. And if one of those is not quite up to snuff, not quite up to speed, it's like a three-legged stool, becomes a little bit wobbly. Here's the snag, though, in some ways, is culture is kind of a nebulous thing. It's hard to wrap our arms around it. It's hard to wrap our brains around it. It's not something that's obvious. And we won't do it justice in this talk, but I'm hoping by just flagging this, we can continue to get the conversations going out there around culture and how we can continue to support it no matter what our working models look like, work from home hybrid or work from the office. You know, in some ways, it's somewhat nostalgic for some of us, like to be back in the office. You can tell I'm back in the office. And you know, looking for the bad coffee, the water cooler chats, the cubicle mazes, and what makes office life most meaningful. We really take it for granted. Those beliefs and those practices that really underpin how we come together as people and work together as employees together. Now, work from home and those kinds of scenarios, this isn't new. Pre-pandemic, about 8% of employees were working from home. Now, depending on who you listen to or which data you look at, anywhere from 20 to 25% of the population, working population, is now working from home. We'll go back to 2009. Some of you may remember this. IBM sent 40% of its workforce remote. Said, we're going to, you folks go and work from home. This is 2009, a few years ago now. 8 years later in 2017, they brought back thousands of those employees. How come? Well, for one thing, they determined that there simply wasn't a substitute for being together, for that communication, that problem solving, that creativity that comes from being together with one another. We make sense, humans, we make sense of our world through body language, emotions, experiences that we can see, and through our obvious in front of us, but also our peripheral vision has a tremendous impact on how we interpret the world around us. And that is really, really tough in this 2D world that we're in right now. So how do we sustain culture when there may not be an office? Well, first of all, let's not get confused with artifacts. Those are the foosball tables and the beanbag chairs. Those are great, but those aren't culture. They're part of it, and they play a role. But that's not the be all end all. Okay? Culture is about activities. Culture is about behaviors. So what do we need to do? When we see the behaviors that are aligned with the cultures in our organizations, leaders need to call those out. We need to bring attention to them. And they may not be obvious, because we kind of take it for granted. Leaders need to call that out and explain why it matters. For example, maybe it's an employee that goes above and beyond for a customer. If that's part of your culture, call it out. It exists, and it's a valued behavior inside the organization. Also, we need to call out those things that aren't aligned with our culture, that are not consistent with it. And we need to get rid of those, push those to the periphery. We don't want those inside our organizations. And of course, talking about congruency, let's get our teams involved in that. Get them to help us identify those activities and behaviors that are congruent with culture, and also identify those behaviors and activities that aren't congruent with our cultures. Stories are pervasive inside organizations, because they really demonstrate and shape culture. Continue to evolve your stories that highlight and focus on those key aspects of your culture. Fundamentally, get to the why of your organization. What's your purpose? Simon Sinek brought this to us many years ago, and it's absolutely critical and absolutely brilliant. You look at the trifecta of motivation, mastery, autonomy, and purpose. Purpose, so mission critical. Make sure you are articulating and highlighting your purpose for your organization. Culture is all about the actions that we take and how we make those visible to others. So some of those things include, for example, intentional interactions. Leaders really, it's incumbent upon leaders to create the space and opportunities for people to connect. If it's in a virtual world, how can you do that differently? Lots of different options out there. Google that, you'll see lots of different creative ideas out there. And checking up on one another, not limited to leaders, it's everybody in the organization checking up, not checking in, checking up on one another. And of course, I think, keeping traditions going, even though they might be done a little bit differently, keeping those things going can be very, very helpful to keeping a culture inside your organization. So culture is important. Leadership is important. Engagement is important. If one of those is out of whack, I'm going to argue that your organization is probably faltering a little bit. So this week, want to surface, get us talking about culture. In the weeks to come, we're going to focus on engagement and leadership. We're going to share some incredibly powerful engagement survey data that we've recently completed. And we'll look forward to speaking about that in the weeks to come. So stay tuned for that, and we'll see you all very soon.